So we will just get started. My name is Trysh Olson. I'm the Education and Youth Programs Manager at Wings Financial Credit Union. And I've been with the credit union for about 17 and a half years. My background prior to taking on the teaching role at Wings was the collection manager. So I certainly have a lot of background when it comes to budgeting and what needs to be done. I'd like to start out today by letting you know that this webinar is actually being sponsored by the Wings Financial Foundation. And as you can see, the credit union, Wings Financial Credit Union, certainly believes strongly in the value of a financial education. And we are very fortunate that there are two of us at the credit union that present these webinars to our vendors and our members and the students and community members across the entire metro area, as well as with other organizations throughout the country. So this webinar today is brought to you on behalf of Wings Financial Foundation. So I'd like to get started here with our first slide about why we should budget. Statistics show that approximately 10% I totally said that wrong. My apologies. It shows that most Americans, or many Americans, I should say, spend at least 10% more than they make each month. So that tells us that we are, as Americans, using credit more and certainly using more money than what we truly have available to us. Now, the question is why? Why do people do that? Well, some of the easy ones are inflation. That just goes hand in hand. Lack of wages, sometimes that does not go hand in hand with inflation. We are a very consumer-based society. We're always trying to keep up with the Joneses and, oh, the neighbor got a new car, I need a new car. Or, you know, my best friend went on a vacation, I need to go on a vacation. And even though we are adults, unfortunately, we do still fall into that trap of being influenced by our friends as well as the media. The other problem that we have here is that credit is readily and easily available to many of us. So the only way that we really know exactly what's happening is basically to know if, and how we are managing our money. So when we talk about a budget and we talk about, what is a budget is basically just a plan for our money. It sounds more complicated than what it really is, but it's basically how do we prioritize our spending as well as creating that savings plan that goes hand in hand. So we want to create budgets that have spending categories, and not only that have categories, but also that have limits as well. So you can see here we've talked a little bit about why, but we've also going to touch more on achieving goals, using money more efficiently. We'll touch a little bit on reducing debt and really talk about the need to be financially secure and always making sure that our expenses are less than our income. It really seems like people think that having a budget is just a really easy thing to be able to do, but really we have a lot of obstacles that can be put in our way when it comes to getting started. Possibly the easy, or I should say the most relevant one, or the most common one, is it's so easy to procrastinate. Time is valuable. We all know that. And when we are getting started with a budget, we have to be able to devote some time and some energy into getting started. We also may feel like there's not enough money. We already know that we're struggling, and so we're just making this assumption that I don't have enough money, so why should I start a budget now? Hard to confront past decisions. I can tell you that what you'll find if you have never done a budget, or for those of you that have, you have probably will find that you will come across some habits or spending habits, maybe we should say, that you have that you're not really comfortable with, and you have to be willing to accept. So that's what I mean when it says on the third bullet there, hard to confront past decisions. Sometimes we look at those credit card bills and you look and think back, I'm still paying on that trip that I took 2 years ago. Like, why am I doing that? Why did I do that? Setting goals is also a part of the budgeting process, which can be very overwhelming. Where do I start? How many goals do I have to have? Do I need to have 10 goals? Is 2 goals okay? And I can't tell you what's right for you. What I can tell you is that when we get to that goal piece of the budgeting, we can talk about that a little bit more. And probably one of the biggest fears that we have right now too is our fear in our change of lifestyle. If all of a sudden we start to budget and we realize that we have to cut back in some areas, that might make us feel like we're cramping our lifestyle a little bit. And maybe you like your lifestyle. I like my lifestyle, but I can tell you from going through a budgeting process myself that those changes aren't always as bad as what you assume they may be. Okay, so at the very end of all this, what we just want to remember is that our income always needs to be more than our expenses. Okay, so let's get all those obstacles out of the way. We've got a positive attitude and we are ready to move forward here onto our next slide, which is step one, goal setting. So we're talking about setting goals and we want to be really specific with our goals and we want to be able to be accountable with those goals and we want to be realistic with our goals. So you can see here I've got set specific measurable goals. Let me give you an example of that. If you said, I would like to save money for a car, that's a very generic goal. But if you said something like, I would like to save at least $5,000 for a down payment for a new car in 1 year, that is getting a little bit more specific and a little bit easier to measure. So you can take, hey, $5,000, I need to save that up in a year. How much money do I need to save or to put away every single month to reach that goal? You could take it even one step further and you could say something like, not only do I want to save for a car, I want to save for a 2019 Ford F-150, and I want to put X amount of dollars down. So really, when we set goals, it helps us to keep ourselves focused, and it kind of helps us hopefully hold ourselves accountable. One thing I've always said is not only do we need to set the goals, but even writing down the goals and having those somewhere where you might see them on a regular basis. Now, I'm not saying you have to go and you have to make this wonderful long list of goals and, put it up on the refrigerator so that your neighbors and your parents and your friends and everybody that comes in can see what your goals are. But put them someplace maybe where you just run across them periodically. Maybe it's in a desk drawer that you open up on a regular basis, or maybe it's in on the little clip on your visor in the car, or maybe it's in your makeup drawer or someplace, your billfold, your wallet. So that's kind of what I'm saying when I say write those goals down and keep those in the forefront so that you can see those on a regular basis and are continuously reminded of those goals. All right, so let's talk about the 3 different types of goals. Okay, we are going to have 3 different types. We're going to have those short-term goals, long-term, and mid-term. Kind of said those in the wrong order. So short-term, mid-term, and long-term. You can see here on the slide that short-term is something that you're saving for less than a year. So it is something that you're going to need access to perhaps a little bit more immediate. So the example here is I want to have at least $1,800, in my emergency savings account within a year. So that's how we set that short-term goal. And you can see that that's measurable because we're saying, okay, in order to hit that goal, I need to save $150 every single month for the next 12 months. Then we move into the midterm goal. So that might be something like maybe it's repaying a debt. Okay, so you can see the example here says 3 years, I want to get this debt paid off, and my debt interest rate's at 18%. So I'm going to need to save about $5 grand, and it's going to cost me about $200 a month. Then we go into the long-term goals. Those are goals that we could say are 5 years or more, and those could be goals such as saving money for our kids to go to college or perhaps for a down payment in the next 5 years. And of course, the most important one for most of us is retirement. And I know, I don't know everybody's age on this webinar, but I can assume that since you all have a full-time job with Dakota Electric, that you all are hoping someday and planning someday to retire. So my best advice for you at this point is if you have not taken advantage of Dakota Electric's retirement program, that you certainly take a look at that and start putting some money away for that sooner than later. Okay, so let's talk about getting organized here. How do we even start, or where do we even start? Okay, so I want to just make it not seem as overwhelming. So some of you probably pay your bills online. Some of you may still get your bills in the mail. I do a little combination of both personally. But what I want you to do is gather up all your monthly bills that you get statements on, including any debts. So your electric bill, your house payment or your rent, your gas, your water. So even those quarterly bills, I know a lot of people pay their water and their trash quarterly. So grab those bills as well. We can figure out what that monthly amount is very easily just by dividing that by 3 on those quarterly bills. Make sure that you have current pay stubs. Pay stubs are really important because you need to know exactly how much you're making. Now, for those of us that are salaried, that's a little bit easier, and we're going to talk about that income piece coming up here in a few slides. If you are currently involved with someone or live with someone, whether that's a spouse or a partner, you want to get that person involved with the budgeting process too. And that's extremely important if you are sharing household income. And I shouldn't just say just sharing household income. Personally, my husband and I, we do not share our regular monthly income, but we do share the expenses. So we know what together the bills are that we both are obligated to. We split those, and then we handle our other bills that the other's not obligated to on our own. I'm not here to say which way is better. I'm just here to say that there are, more than one way to handle dual household income. Make sure that you get into a routine about how often I'm going to budget this, and where do I even start with the budget, because you've gathered all of this information now, and now you've got these piles. Hopefully it's not too many piles, and you think to yourself, what am I going to do with this? What I want you to do is realize that this budget process does not need to be fancy. Okay, so you can start by just writing everything down on a piece of notebook paper. If you are someone that likes the computer, feel free to make an Excel spreadsheet, or feel free to use a different budgeting software that might be out there. There is a lot of ways that you can start this, but you have to start at some point, and part of that is really being diligent to writing all of this information down. In addition to just writing it down and or tracking it on a spreadsheet or a software, obviously in the world that we live in, there are a lot of apps out there as well. There are so many different budgeting tools out there that you can use. For those of you that may or may not be Wings Financial Credit Union members, Wings Financial also does have a budgeting app as well. So if you're not a member of Wings, which is completely fine, I would strongly urge you to also check into your primary financial institution and see what tools they have out there for you to be a successful budgeter as well. So I had mentioned in this second step that we were going to talk about income and how do we track that. So what I want people to always remember is that income is not always just the money that we get in from our jobs. It could be money that we are getting in from second jobs. It could be Social Security or other types of benefits that you may receive. It could also be investment money. And it could be alimony, it could be child support. We want to really make sure that we're keeping track of all of that money coming in. And what I want you to do is really track it for at least a month. 2 months is great, especially if you are somebody that's paid hourly or on commission. I mentioned earlier that those of us that are paid salaried, our paychecks are pretty much the same every single time we get paid, so it's really easy for us to track. For those of you that are hourly or commission-based, you're going to probably need to look back about 3 months or so and make sure that you take an average of what those 3 months were to come up with that average monthly income. You really have to know what you're starting with in order to be able to even start this budgeting process and setting up those limitations. So we talked about tracking our income, and now we're going to talk about the hardest part, or the harder part, which is tracking your expenses. Okay, so in expenses, any cost of living amount you pay, and this is going to include our needs and our wants. Now, some of you might be chuckling and saying, why is she bringing up needs and wants? Well, I bring it up because needs and wants are something that is part of the core curriculum across the United States and starts as early as kindergarten, believe it or not. So it's still one of those concepts that we learn at a young age that we still need to be diligent in keeping in our mind. What do I really need to live and what do I want? So you can see I've got some different categories up here. These are pretty basic ones that most of us probably have. Some of you may not have student loan debt. Some of you you might have find some categories you didn't quite knew existed. You might be looking at challenging yourself to even keep track of the small snacks that you may buy when you stop to get gas, or the snack you might grab out of the vending machine at work. So what you really have to do is be honest with yourself and track every single thing that you're spending. So whether that's you're just keeping it on your phone in the notepad, or you're keeping all the receipts, whatever the case may be, the biggest part is that you are completely honest and tracking everything that you can, even the little things, because those small things add up very, very quickly. As we're talking about these expenses, we typically see two different types of expenses. We've got fixed expenses and we've got variable expenses. So our fixed expenses are basically the ones that stay the same every single month. So that's going to be our car payments, our rent or our mortgage payment. Some of our utilities, if you're set up on a fixed amount through a budgeting piece with a utility company, daycare, student loans, things like that. Now, those variable expenses are the amounts that change every single month. It's usually still expenses that we have, but they can fluctuate. That's going to be things like our transportation costs, so gas, our clothing, entertainment, eating out, groceries. If all of a sudden this month we have medications due, car maintenance, things like that. So it's real important for you to understand what your fixed expenses are, and then really pay attention to those variable expenses, because the variable expenses are the pieces that we're going to have to eventually make adjustments to if we find out that our expenses are greater than our income. Because remember, we want our income to be greater than our expenses. So those fixed expenses are the easy ones, and the variable expenses are the tougher ones. Along with fixed and variable expenses, you can see both included the category of debt of some way. So I want to just basically or quickly just touch on good debt versus bad debt. So you can see that good debt is a debt that increases in value over time. So this is basically a debt that's going to give you some form of return or investment. So that's why I showed the examples there, such as a home or a business or an education. So many students, we know there's trillions of dollars out there in student loan debts. But what we want to realize is that the money that we spend to give ourselves a good education, hopefully, is going to pay off in the long run with us paying off those debts and eventually making more than what we spent over a lifetime. Now, bad debt, that's debt that continues to decrease in value over time. And it really is those debts that almost are more debts that we put on, say, credit cards. So I'm not here to say that credit cards are not an option and that they are not a good tool. However, it's how do we use that tool to make sure that we're managing our debts wisely. So bad debt could be, oh, I decide today that I'm having a bad day because I've been locked up in my house for 90 days and the stores are open and I just really want to go shopping or something. But I don't have the means to do that. So I go and I put, $200-$300 or whatever the case may be on a credit card. Or I decide that, hey, we deserve to go on a vacation, but I haven't saved for that vacation, so I put it on a credit card. Unfortunately, credit card debt could be seen as bad debt because typically most people don't pay that debt off every month. So what happens is it continues to accrue interest, and then the interest adds onto our balance, and that balance continues to go higher. So that's what I mean when I say that bad debt is a debt that decreases in value over time. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about our fixed expenses and our variable expenses. I want to talk a little bit now also about creating those spending categories, because we've now hopefully by this step kept track of every single thing that we've spent money on. And we want you, again, to track this for at least 30 days. So I'm going to be really honest with you. These first 30 days of getting into the habit of writing everything down is going to feel a bit overwhelming, and it's going to be maybe even annoying to some of you. But if you are really committed to making this process work, you have to be committed to putting in the time right up front. So I want you to be honest with yourselves as far as you need to track everything. Now, some of these items up on the screen here are very, very obvious ones. I don't know about the rest of you, but I certainly haven't spent a lot of money dining out lately. But I can tell you prior to COVID-19, I probably ate out a lot more than what I needed to. I also want you, like I said, to keep track of any others miscellaneous spending. I can tell you from my past experience, because what you see with me is what you get. When I first took this job, part of my interview process was to create a budget presentation and present that presentation for the interview. Well, I thought this was going to be a breeze, no big deal. I knew where my money was going. My husband and I had no problem paying our bills. It just seemed like it really wasn't necessary. And so I started keeping track of everything, and I knew the categories that I had were going to be very similar to what was showing up here on the screen. What I found out is that I had categories I didn't realize were technically categories. And one of those categories for me was Caribou Coffee. At the time, our daughter was young, and sometimes getting everybody up and out of the house and to school just seemed very overwhelming in the morning. And for those of you that know where Wings is at in Apple Valley, we've got a Caribou right across the street. And it was so easy for me to turn right into Caribou before I turned left into Wings, because it had been a tough morning. And I just felt like I really deserved a little treat. What I didn't realize is that treat, 5 days a week or 6 days a week, was costing me over $1,300 a year. So it wasn't that I necessarily was missing that $5 or whatever that small amount was per day. That it was looking at that picture as a whole going, holy cow, I'm spending $1,300 a year. Now, what could I be putting that towards? Maybe I put that towards debt. Maybe I should be thinking, wow, I've got a child to put through college. I really should maybe look at putting that away. So what I want you to realize is that when you do create these spending categories, you are going to find that you have categories that you don't necessarily know exist. Okay, so let's talk about taking these categories and fitting them into this beautiful little pie chart. All right, so you can see the suggested budget limits here. Obviously, the first one that probably jumps out to you is the housing slice at 35%. So what this basically means is that you should not be spending more than 35% of your net income. So your net income, right, is the amount of money that you actually bring home after taxes on your housing. So that is going to certainly might be a little different if you rent as opposed to if you own. But what would all fall into that category of housing would be your mortgage payment, your rent payment, any utilities that you're responsible for the home or for the apartment, insurance, whether that's renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance, property taxes if you are a homeowner, as well as any HOA fees, so homeowners association fees if you're someone that lives in a townhome or a community that has an association. Okay, so 35% is based on housing. All right, then I like to kind of go backwards, or should I say go counterclockwise here and say the turquoise slot is 15%, and that's our transportation. And what they say the average is about 15% again of our net income. So this is saying anything that I spend money on for my vehicle, whether that's a car payment, whether it's a lease payment, that's going to include my car insurance. It's going to include my gas. It's also going to include registration fees or license fees, maintenance, and for anyone that possibly has parking fee for contract parking for work. So you can see that we've got our housing very separate and our transportation very separate. Okay, then we have that purple slice that's 15%, which is debt. All right, so most of us think of debt and we go, oh, I got a car payment, I got a house payment. Those are not included in this slice of the pie for debt. So again, debt is, we don't want debt payments to exceed 15% of our, our net income. So when I say debt, we're talking about debt, I just need to grab a sip of water. We are talking about debt being student loans. We're talking about retail installment contracts. We're talking about credit cards, maybe some personal loans, and even medical bills. So debt excluding our cars and excluding our home payments. Then we go into that green slice, or that yellowish lime green, and that's other living expenses. So 25% falls into that other category. That's going to be our food, our clothing, entertainment, daycare. It could be just general medical expenses, so maybe that's prescription costs, things like that, charitable giving, tithing. So anything that doesn't fit nicely into those other three categories of debt, transportation, and transportation and housing is going to fall into this bucket. That leads me to our last bucket, the last slice of the pie, the 10%, and that's savings. So many people forget that savings really should be, we should think about savings as an expense. It is money that we are putting away today to use at a later date. So when we put that money away, that's no longer available to us. So treat it as an actual bill, okay? So just a quick audience exercise for you. This isn't a poll or anything, but just something for you to kind of think about is when you look at the pie chart there, you know, like I said, we notice, obviously all of us notice, the first thing we probably notice is that housing piece at 35%. Thinking about what you take home for your monthly pay, I invite you to quickly do a calculation and see how close are you to that 35%. Okay, and what I want you to understand is with this pie chart is this is just a recommendation. All right, some of you may only be spending 25% on housing because you don't have the debt. Maybe your debt's only at 5%. Okay, so these are general guidelines to use, but realize that some people's pie charts and the way that they cut as far as figuring out what they can afford by housing and things like that are maybe different than someone else. So there's a comment here that just came through that said, I found 33% of my income is being deducted directly from my paycheck as federal and state taxes, health and medical, and vision insurance, voluntary life, and healthcare, flexible spending, savings, and anything like that. And that's a really great point. So thank you to who brought that up without mentioning any names, because that's a pretty easy indicator. If you're not exactly sure what your take-home pay is, take about 33% off, give or take a little bit. And that's a good starting point if you're doing this exercise right now to sort of see how close you are to that household 35% recommendation. So again, what I want you to realize is these are general guidelines for you. So when we're looking at how to maybe do a monthly income piece here, let's say that you make $3,000 a month, okay? So $3,000 a month is my take-home pay. That's telling me that I should be spending no more than $1,050 on my housing expense. I should be trying to put away at least $300. About $450 is going to go to debt payoff as well as transportation at 15% each, and then about $750 on anything else. So this is just kind of an example. Now, how we get to figuring out this, these different categories and what goes in them and how much we should be spending and not spending is really the basis of why I need you to so diligently track your expenses, okay? So we're going to move on to step number 6, which is examine and adjust. So hopefully now we've done this where we've tracked our information here for over a month, okay? And sometimes it's sort of fun for some people, depending on how much you get into this. Some of us are get a little more geeked out over this than others. But maybe at the very beginning say, hey, this is how much I think I spend on groceries. This is how much I want to spend on groceries, and see how did you actually fare? How did you actually come out? All right. So you're going to see, did you actually spend more than you made? Remember, 10%, or excuse me, many Americans spend 10% more than what they make. I don't know what many means, but many to me means probably more than 50%. So thinking about that, most of us are spending more money than what we make. Where did that overspending come? My guess is you're going to see that it came in those variable expense categories, the ones that you have a little bit more control over. Did you find a caribou category or an unknown category that you didn't know existed? You might have. There's a reality check for you there. How many categories do you have? Did you think you maybe were only going to have 5 and you realize, gosh, I actually have 15? Can you eliminate any of those categories, or can you decrease those? Can you make adjustments? Like I said, for me, I found that I had the caribou category, and so it was a little bit eye-opening to me to go, wow, this is a luxury. And even though I could technically afford that, did I really need that? No, that was something that I desired. That was not required. So what I did is I adjusted that a little bit, and I said, I'm only going to go on Fridays. So instead of going 20 times a month, I was only going 4 times a month. Okay, I might have snuck in a Saturday or Sunday here or there, but you get the picture, right? So what I did the other days was and I still do this to this day, make my coffee at home. And I like my coffee foofed up. That's why it costs me so much. I like all the flavors and the syrups and the whipped cream and all that. So I make my own foofed up coffee at home. And what I actually find is on Fridays when I go to Caribou, I actually appreciate and enjoy that caribou more than I did when it was something that I expected to give myself every day. So even though cutting and making adjustments can seem and feel like it's a painful experience, sometimes there are hidden rewards that we don't actually see or find out about until we actually have gone through that process of adjusting. Alrighty, so let's talk about ways that we can save and cut back. And I really like to focus a little bit more on the discretionary spending. And discretionary spending, that could be recurring or non-recurring expenses for non-essential items. So this is where we have to be realistic and challenge ourselves to what do I have that are non-essential items. So basically our wants. Those are going to be the things like getting your nails done, maybe going golfing, going to the driving range on a regular basis, getting coffee, maybe shopping, online shopping. I don't know. It was real easy to do some online shopping when we couldn't go anywhere. Thankfully, I kept that under control. But what are some things we can do? One thing I would say to do that's worked well for many that I've worked with in the past is to really try to take your clothing budget, your entertaining, and I shouldn't say budget, I should say clothing category, entertainment category, as well as your dining out or eating out category, and just right off the top, cut 10% off. Okay, so figure out what are those amounts, and right off the bat, cut 10% off of each of those. Then I would say, look at what do you have for utility bills that maybe you could cut back on or change packaging to. That would be things like reviewing your cable bill, maybe your cell phone plan. Make sure that if you're somebody that has unlimited data, are you really using that much data that you need an unlimited package, or could you actually be saving some money and go down to a package that doesn't offer unlimited? What about memberships? A lot of people have gym memberships or memberships to the golf course and things like that. And we all have good intentions that we're going to use these memberships, and we realize we're really not using those. So is there opportunities there to cut back on some of those type of things, as well as subscriptions? I got a subscription, I remember one year, for People magazine, and I just thought it was going to be amazing because I love reading the People magazine. Well, when that magazine is delivered to you once a week, I barely was having time to read last week's before this week's came. So for me, it was money that was not being wisely spent because I wasn't utilizing the subscription in the way that I intended it to. So basically, looking at things like, where else can I save on necessities? Are you someone that could maybe look at using some store brands? Now, I am very particular on certain things that I use. Toilet paper is one. I like Charmin. I'm not going to use anything other than Charmin, so I'm not going to go down and buy cheap ply toilet paper. But I will be happy to buy store brand bags, like whether they're trash bags or Ziploc bags, even canned fruits and vegetables. What I'm realizing from working in the marketing department too is so many of those brands, those store brands that we see, are actually just the store paying the regular company to put their label on the product. So I can tell you, for example, like the Market Pantry from Target tuna is actually like a bumblebee tuna. It's just that Target has paid them to put their logo on it. So what I want you to realize is sometimes that buying off-brand or store brands saves us a lot of money, and you're still getting the same product in a lot of cases. Coupons and being parts of different rewards programs at stores can always be good. The only thing I would caution you on is don't buy something because you have a coupon, or don't buy something because it's on sale unless it was something that was really on your list. Otherwise, you're just really spending more money in the long run. Card payments are another thing. You can always look at seeing if the interest rates, if your interest rate can be lowered, if your payment can be adjusted, if you need in that situation. Also right now with mortgage rates being low, a lot of people are able to modify their mortgage. And when I say modify, that's just basically signing a modification agreement. It's not going through the whole refinance process, but actually being able to modify that payment and make it a little bit more manageable for you. Now, sometimes there is a fee associated with that with that modification, but it might be that extra $200 that you need every month to free up that you can now be putting somewhere else. For people that aren't quite as dedicated and able to control their spending, we can always go back to the very old-fashioned way of the envelope method, which is, I know I'm spending this much on groceries every single month. So let's say that's $400. As soon as I get paid, I'm putting $400 in my grocery envelope. And then I'm just living kind of on a cash basis until I get comfortable with what my new budget is going to be. So those are just some ways to cut back and to think about. In the interest of time here, I'm going to speed up just a little bit because I want to make sure that we have some time at the end for some questions and answers. But we had talked about that 10% slice of the pie that was savings. And that is paying the highest priority first, which in all cases should be ourselves. And we really need to make ourselves a priority. And that's what PYF means, is pay yourself first. Okay. Some of you may say, hey, I can't pay myself first. I'm living paycheck to paycheck as it is. And so then I would say, start thinking about what could you give up to put a little bit away in savings? I know I said that sweet spot is 10%. That doesn't mean that 10% works that way for everyone. For some of you, it might be starting out at 5% or only 3%. But really making sure that you're paying shelter, utilities, insurance, food, your savings. Those are your needs. Those are the things that we need to survive. Those are the things that we need to make sure that we continue to have as part of our outline for running our household budget. Remember to think about your goals. What goals did I set? And are my goals in line with how I'm paying those priorities first? You can see I've got a little note here too that says pay down your highest rate credit cards first. That's a great tip, but again, like it says, make sure that you're still paying at least the minimum on all of the other cards. So you can't just say, oh, I'm just going to pay credit card A and I'm not going to do anything with B and C until I'm done with A. No, it doesn't work that way. I want you to pay more towards A if that's the highest interest rate, but still maintaining those minimum payments towards the other credit cards. And then if you have student loans, obviously, always keeping up with those payments, since majority of those are backed by the government, and we don't want to have to give up our tax returns for those. Step number 8 is, hopefully, once you go through all of this process, you're going to have some money left over. That's our goal, remember, is to always have more income than we do expenses. So divide what's left over. Look back at those goals and try to figure out, what can I do with this leftover money? Oh, I have a high rate interest credit card. I should probably be starting to pay that down more. Or I'm only putting 7% away for my savings. I think I could actually do 8% or 9%. Okay. Remember to always have some type of an entertainment piece. So even if you cut out all your entertainment and now you're like, wow, I have something left over, that's okay. It's okay to spend a little bit of money on yourself. We all work hard. Go get that caribou or go to that driving range or whatever it is that's going to bring you a little bit of joy with that leftover money. So again, I said this when we were talking about tracking our expenses as well as setting our goals. I'm going to say it again. Be honest and realistic with yourself when you're looking at this entire process, regardless of if we're on step 1, step 5, or step 8. Step 9 says, okay, I've done everything that I can, and maybe I'm just still have higher expenses than I have income. That's okay. That happens to many people, and it's okay to ask for help. Sometimes enlisting the help of someone that we trust or even a professional is what we need to do to really help us understand where we can make those adjustments and where we can change things up a little bit. For those of you that are members at Wings, Wings does have the Wings Financial Advisors. Those are free to you as members. And so always feel free to always ask an expert. I can tell you too, many organizations have the employee assistance programs, the EAP programs. A lot of those programs also include financial assistance, advice, and expert and professional opinions as well. So feel free to use those resources. Step number 10 is our last step, and that is stick to it. Possibly one of the harder things to do once you've gone through the entire process is you have to use self-discipline. You have to be devoted to doing this, just like you have to be devoted to stopping smoking or to losing weight. If you're not devoted, dedicated, and ready to make the change, it's not going to work for you. So we need you to set that budget up. Remember, be realistic with yourself and realize some months are going to go exactly the way that you plan. Some months are not. So what does that mean? It means that you have to continue to examine and adjust, all right? Continue to look at those habits. Continue to make changes on those variable expenses when you can. And just remember that the best way to stick to your budget is to actually start a budget, okay? So we want you to make sure that you continue to stick to your budget and that it actually becomes a habit. We know that habits sometimes are hard to break. They are sometimes hard to start as well, but as soon as we start them, good habits, hopefully we can keep those habits. So remember, you're not going to achieve your financial goals if you create your budget to fit your lifestyle, all right? So you're going to achieve your goals if you adjust your lifestyle to fit within your budget. So figure out what your budget is, okay? Tell your money where to go instead of wondering where it went.